Hello everyone and welcome to my latest video. Today I'm going to be discussing Nancy Drew, Stay Tuned for Danger. I'm going to be comparing the novel from 1987 with the computer game from 1999. Before I begin, a spoiler alert is in effect, as I will be going through the details of both stories and including the culprits. And I did say culprits because technically there's more than one. So without further ado, let's jump on in. I'm going to begin by discussing the book. This is case number 17 from the Nancy Drew Files series, entitled Stay Tuned for Danger. In this adventure, Nancy and Bess are invited to New York City to take a vacation and visit Nancy's Aunt Eloise Drew. Nancy doesn't plan on solving any mysteries, but naturally, she finds one. Eloise's downstairs neighbor happens to be the actress Maddie Jensen, and she wonders if Nancy could investigate the attempts that are made on the life of her co-star, Rick Arlen. Nancy's not too keen on this plan. She doesn't want to have another case on her hands. She actually winds up throwing herself on her bed, covering her head in a pillow in absolute dismay. She really just wanted a holiday. But she figures she can speak with Maddie and maybe give her some advice based on the information she gives her. But of course, this is Nancy Drew. She's going to take on the case, which she does. So in the end, she and Bess are brought on as extras on the set, which allows them to snoop around, look for motives, and keep an eye on Rick. But one unforeseen circumstances, Bess winds up falling head over heels for Rick. He is a charmer, he is a ladies' man, and as a result, Bess's life is put in danger. Throughout the story, Rick continues to be a target, and with Bess by his side, she too winds up being in the line of fire. And this is something that worries Nancy throughout the story. So next I'll move on to the characters. First we have, of course, Maddie Jensen. She's the actress who asked Nancy to help. She's a little dramatic, but she really cares for Rick, and she's really the only person who feels that the threats to Rick are real. Then we have Rick Arlen himself. He's a well-known actor, he's kind of full of himself, and he doesn't take the threats seriously. Next we have Luther Parks. He's the director. He gets mentioned in the story a few times, but he's not all that prominent. Following him is Lillian Weiss, who's the assistant director. She's pretty snarky. She sneers at people. She doesn't like Rick. She doesn't like anyone, really. Then there's William Pappas. He's the producer, and he is always yelling. He never has anything positive to say, but he is very concerned about the threats. He's taken extra measures to try and keep the set safe, and yet dangerous events still take place, which frustrates him even more. So again, we hear him yelling and yelling. There's also Kay Wills. She is the makeup artist for both Maddie and Rick. She's just in a few of the scenes in the book. She's not super prominent, but she does make a few appearances. And then we have Dwayne Casper. He is Maddie Jensen's agent and the former agent to Rick Arlen. He hates Rick with a passion. He doesn't hide that, but he also really cares for Maddie. Whenever there's an accident, he's concerned about Maddie first. He's worried that she's going to get hurt as a result of what's going on with Rick. So those are our main characters that we read about in the book. So as the case goes on, Nancy and Bess continue to snoop and ultimately figure out two people who are behind the incidents. One is a crazed fan, and the other, we'll call him an angry coworker. We'll get into more details in a little bit. For now, let's move on to the computer game. So this is the second of the Nancy Drew adventure games released by Her Interactive. Very, very similar story. They stick pretty close to the source material. So in this version, it's just Nancy, no Bess, and Aunt Eloise has invited her to New York because of her friend Maddie Jensen and the threats that are made to Rick. So Nancy's not there for vacation. She's actually brought in immediately because of the mystery. So Nancy pretends to be an extra and goes to Worldwide Broadcasting, where she can interrogate employees and again search for motives and search for clues. The characters in this version are much the same as from the book. So again, we have Maddie Jensen. It's her apartment where Nancy's staying, and she's the one who's most concerned about Rick and the threats. We have Rick Arlen again. the one receiving the threats, still pretty full of himself, much more so in the game. We have Lillian Weiss, who is actually the director. Rather than assistant director, she's the full-on bigwig director in this telling. And she's still kind of Miss Cranky Pants. And then we have Millie Strathhorn. She's the prop master. She doesn't care for Rick Arlen, or rather, she doesn't care for his on-screen character of Rory Danner. She kind of feels like he deserves some punishment. Then there's William Pappas. We don't actually meet him. He's not a physical character in the game. But we do hear him yelling a few times through his office door, and we do speak with him over the telephone. And then finally, we have Dwayne Powers. He again is the agent for Maddie, former agent to Rick. He's known the two for a long time, and again, he dislikes Rick a great deal and really cares for Maddie. So much the same as the book, Nancy is snooping primarily around worldwide broadcasting in order to figure out who's been threatening Rick. And again, there are two culprits, but rather than a crazy fan being one of them, both happen to work with Rick in some capacity. So now we can start by looking at the comparisons. So first things first, we'll look at the storyline, which is ultimately the same between the two. So in the book, it's Nancy and Bess who are invited on vacation and then are asked to help try to find out who kills or wants to kill Rick. In the game, Nancy's invited to New York so that she can look into the threats. So in the original story, they're on holiday and the mystery finds Nancy and Bess. In the game, Nancy's there immediately for the mystery. So that's a little different, but ultimately they reach the same point. Next, we can look at the location, which is the same. So both versions, Nancy is at Worldwide Broadcasting and in New York. Nothing different there. However, the show is a little different, just in terms of the title. In the book, it's titled Danner's Dream, which comes from the character Rick Arlen plays, Rory Danner. In the computer game, they've called it Light of Our Love, which sounds a bit more like the soap operas that were on air at the time of the release in the late 90s. So then we can look at the names of some of the characters. As I noted in my video for Secrets Can Kill, 3 characters had names that were tweaked in that one. In this one, it's 2, although in some ways only 1 because one character you don't really read or see much, and that's the security guard. So in the book, there's a security guard named Harry. He's only referenced by name once. Otherwise, he sort of pops up here and there, but he's not a real player in the book. In the game, he has been turned into a physical character who is named Ralph. And we only see him when we're entering WWB, or at least entering through the front doors, and at the very end of the game. He's a very minor character, except for the fact that he saves Nancy at the very end. And then the other character that they tweaked is that of Dwayne, and it's just his last name. In the book, his last name is Casper. In the game, his last name is Powers. And I often wonder why they make these little changes. Did they not like the last name Casper? Did it mean something to them, or did they simply think that there was a stronger name out there? Did they like the name Powers? That's something I wonder about. It's intriguing. Not that I dislike it, I'm just sort of curious as to why the change was made. Next, we can look at some of the characters that differ between the two mediums. And we'll start with the book. So in the book, we have Aunt Eloise. She's not in the computer game. She's not necessary to the story, so she's been removed. There's also Luther Parks, who's the director. He, as I mentioned earlier, only has a few appearances in the book, and they wind up taking his title of director and making that Lillian's role in the computer game, so he could be effectively removed as well. Same goes for Kay Wills. She is the makeup artist. Again, in a couple chapters we see her, but she's not a key character. And then we have a crazy fan. He's kind of important to the story because he's one of the culprits. He does threaten Rick Arlen, but he's not necessary for the version that the game became. So then we look at the game, which has one extra character, and that's Millie Strathhorn. Now, she's the prop master. In the book, Nancy does go into the prop room, but they don't have a woman working in there. It's more of a wizened old man. Nancy finds him asleep with his newspaper, and she has this one very brief interaction with him, and that's it. So the prop master in the book ultimately has no purpose. So they didn't actually need one in the game. But I think they brought her in for two reasons. The first is that she does actually take on some of the characteristics of the crazy fan from the book. Millie Strathern, as previously mentioned, doesn't like Rick Arlen. She kind of thinks that he deserves some punishment, and that sort of fits with the crazy fan. But the other reason she was created, and this is my assumption, I could be mistaken, but I think she was created in order to pay homage to Mildred Wirt Benson, who was the first and sort of the main author of the first Nancy Drew series. So I think this was really meant to acknowledge this wonderful writer who first brought these stories to life. Let's move on and talk about Maddie. So she is the TV actress. She was formerly involved with Rick Arlen, so they used to be in a relationship. And she's the one who asks for Nancy's help. So that's the same between the two. In the book, Aunt Eloise actually describes her as having an artistic temperament, so she's a little bit dramatic. In the game, she's a bit more level-headed. But beyond that little difference about personality, she's the same character between the mediums. Then we can look at Rick, or Richard Arbutowski. So his stage name is Rick Arlen. In the computer game, we do see a file in Dwayne's office that's labeled Rick Arbutowski. In the book, it's actually Richard, but basically they've kept that original character or profile for who Rick Arlen was before he was a star. So that small element is the same between the two, which I think is pretty cool. So he's a TV actor, and he ultimately wants to break his contract with WWE so he can work on other projects. And he doesn't believe his life is in danger. He doesn't take the threat seriously. So those elements are the same between book and game. And then one sort of slight change. So in the book, because Bess is present, he flirts with her. In the game, he flirts with Nancy, and he's much more of an egocentric person. He's really full of himself in the game. In the book, he's a little bit calmer. So then we can look at Lillian. So she was previously involved with Rick. He dated Maddie and actually dumped Maddie to date Lillian. And then when he got sort of his bigger role with the television show, he then dumped Lillian. And she hates him. Like, she loathes him. She thinks he deserves to suffer. In the book, she actually says he deserves to die. So she doesn't hide this fact about how much she dislikes this man. So in the book, she's the assistant director. In the game, she's basically been promoted to director. And another thing to note is in the game, she sends Rick poisoned chocolates. In the book, he does receive these chocolates, but it's not indicated who sends them. It's either the crazy fan or Dwayne. That's what we can surmise. Then we can look at William. And this is just a brief note because we don't interact with him in the game beyond a telephone call and overhearing him through his closed door. He's the producer of the show, he's angry with Rick, and he's always yelling. That's true for both the book and the game. No difference. And then we can look at Dwayne. So Dwayne is Maddie's agent. He used to be the agent for Rick, and he's known the two of them for years. They used to do Shakespeare together, so he's known them a long time. And he cares deeply for Maddie, and he passionately hates Rick. So these feelings of his are the same between book and game. And he winds up disguising himself as an extra or a stagehand in order to hide in plain sight when he tries to harm Rick. Slight changes here. In the book, his disguise changes. It's not always the same getup that he's wearing. And it's actually Lillian who finds his disguises sort of scattered throughout. And that's what leads her to realize that, something's going on, and she starts her own investigation. In the game, he has a single alias, and it's just that of Owen Spader. Owen Spader isn't mentioned in the book. He's created solely for the game. And then the last person we'll look at is the crazy fan. So in the book, there's a fan who stalks and threatens Rick, and then tries to throw him overboard when Gil is a friend of Rick, who's sort of briefly mentioned, Bess and Nancy are out on a day cruise. He doesn't succeed, he winds up being captured, and that's sort of the end of the crazy fan. He'd recently been released from a mental institution, so he was sort of off his rocker, crazy about Rick in not a good way, and it doesn't last very long. He winds up being arrested. So that's sort of it for comparing characters. The next thing I really like is the dialogue. So some of the dialogue is actually copied verbatim from the book into the game. I remember reading some of the chapters and some lines and saying, hey, I recognize this passage. It's word for word, and I think it's really nice that they took those pieces of dialogue and copied it straight over, because it is written really well. I liked some of those lines, so that was pretty cool. And then we have Rick and Maddie's engagement. So the two actors become engaged. In the book, it's the real life individuals. Rick, Arlen, Maddie Jensen, they plan to marry, and this happens after Rick finally realizes that the threats are real. He wants to get back with Maddie, fix their problems, and asks her to marry him. In the game, it's just their on-screen counterparts who wed. There's always the possibility that the two in real life could get close again, but for their story, it's just on the TV show that their characters wind up getting married. And then the last thing to compare is the ending. The endings are actually fairly similar. They're almost the exact same. So Lillian invites Nancy to the set at WWB. In the book, she invites her to come in the morning. In the game, it's in the evening. So she invites Nancy to meet her so that she can tell her that she's done her own investigation. She tells her about finding the bits of disguise, and then as she's continued her investigation, she receives a threat of her own. At that point, Dwayne turns up, and then in the book he turns on the lights on the set so that everything's sort of blinding, but he's also up in the sound booth, which is the same as in the game. Now here are where things change a little bit. In the book, Dwayne threatens the women with a gun. There's no gun in the game. But in the book, that's sort of his weapon of fear. So he starts to come down. Nancy sees a smoke machine as she runs over and turns it on, so that the room fills up, and because the lights are on, everything's too bright and it makes it harder for Dwayne to see them. She then runs over to Lillian, grabs her, and helps to hide her in a corner. Dwayne unfortunately realizes that there's a fan nearby, which he turns on to blow the smoke away so that the girls can't hide anymore. Nancy then tackles him from behind, and the police enter. And the police are there because Aunt Eloise was worried about Nancy. She called them, and they're all sort of on standby. And so they come in, bust in, arrest Dwayne, and that's sort of the end of his reign of terror. In the game, it's a little different. Nancy pulls the fire alarm so that they can alert Ralph to their situation, and then she has to unlock that horrid puzzle at the very end of the game. And that's so that they can unlock the vacuum sealed door for the set, which is something that's actually in the book. That's why Nancy and Lillian don't just leave the set. Dwayne has sealed the doors and locked them in. So in the game, that's what Nancy has to unlock in order for Ralph to come in and save their lives. So now we can sort of conclude of what we've discussed, or what I've pointed out, these observations I've made. So the 1999 computer game rendition of the 1987 book is truly nearly identical to the original story. The book has some extra scenes which you would expect that are not included in the game, because there's always extra information in a book that just isn't going to translate into the game. So they get cut. The book also goes beyond the 3 main locations that are included in the game, which are Maddie's apartment, Dwayne Powers' talent agency, and WWB. However, even though they've removed some of the locations, they did manage to put in most of the events. from the book into the game, such as the falling Klieg light that happens at the beginning of both the book and the game. Rick is sent poisoned chocolates, from whom is a little different, and then there's the bomb in Rick's room. So in the computer game, Nancy goes into Rick's empty dressing room, finds the bomb, she disarms it, and everything's hunky-dory. In the book, it's a little different. Rick and Kay, so again, Kay is the makeup artist, they happen to be in his room. And Rick is taking off his makeup, so he has a towel on his face, and the bomb goes off behind the mirror, breaking the mirror, sending shards of glass everywhere. Fortunately, because he had the cloth covering himself, he's mostly unharmed, except for his hands. They get all scratched up from the glass. He winds up going to hospital, and then that's the moment he realizes his life is actually in danger. That's the turning point for him. It's that event that sort of changes things. So then the book characters, a few of them were removed from the game. Again, people who didn't play key roles. So we didn't need Aunt Eloise. We didn't need to have Luther. They were able to instead assign his role of director to Lillian's character in the game. That worked out really well. Kay is removed entirely. Again, we don't need the makeup artist. She happens to be present for a couple scenes, but she doesn't have any impact on the story. The crazed fan is somewhat recreated in Millie Strathorn. So again, she sort of embodies some of his characteristics, her hatred for Rick Arlen. She sort of takes those elements from the crazed fan, who's otherwise been removed. And other than that, the overall plot is exactly the same. Nancy is asked to find out who is threatening Rick. She's hired as an extra at WWB, and she does her sleuthing. And ultimately, two individuals are responsible for, different crimes against Rick. In the book, we have the crazy fan and Dwayne. In the game, we have Lillian, because she sent the poison chocolates. And again, Dwayne. Dwayne really is the ultimate baddie throughout both mediums. So that's really it. That is my comparison for the Nancy Drew Files Stay Tuned for Danger compared to the Nancy Drew Adventure computer game, also called Stay Tuned for Danger. So the two are really, really similar. Her Interactive truly used almost every element that they could from the base story of the book in the game. Like, they really, really stuck to their source material. And it worked. It is a well-written story. It's not my favorite game. It was actually my least favorite game for many years. But I can't deny that it's done well and the story works. Everything is done super well. And I think that transition from book to game is actually quite impressive. So sort of hats off to Her Interactive for how well they went from book to game. It's truly great. That's really all that I have to say for this comparison video. I hope people found it interesting. I hope you get the chance to pick up a copy of the book and read that and do your own sort of comparison to the computer game. So, keeping you guys any longer, I'm going to say thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I look forward to doing more of these videos. Have a good one. Bye-bye.